I want to spend time talking more about some responses and emails I've gotten, and I'm going to start with one that's not even on our homepage. As you know, I post on many other places around the internet, at Stand to Reason, at Cold Case Christianity, at Please Convince Me, at Christianity.com, at Apologetics.com, at Conversant Life, also at Cross Examined, and in one of these locations we were posting about just the case for Christianity. Is that it's the article maybe you've read. It's called "When the Case for God is Strong, Skeptics Attack Christianity," and it was based on something I talked about very recently here. That my observation is that when when you have a case that's pretty good for theism, in which the evidence in and of itself would incline you toward theism, I often will see the naturalist, the skeptic, attack Christianity in particular, rather than just attack a rather general form of theism or deism, because it's an easier attack for the skeptic to make. And we talked about that last time, I think, on the podcast the time before last. So I won't go into that again today. But in response to that post, I got a post from an atheist. And I got to tell you, when I first read it, I thought, is this a Christian posting this kind of tongue-in-cheek in a way to kind of stir up the atheists who also visit the site? Or is this truly an atheist who's posting? So I did a little research on the poster, and sure enough, he's an atheist. And here's what he says, and I thought it was an excellent way for us to examine the consequences of an atheistic worldview. Because here's what he says. He says, to all my atheist friends, because this particular website has got a lot of atheists that post underneath each blog. And he's one of these atheists that post. And he's really writing to his other atheist friends, internet associates, people he probably never met, but they post together on sites like ours. And he says this. I'm going to read the whole thing to you, and then I want to come back and comment on it. He says, "Let us stop sugarcoating it. I know it's hard to come out and be blunt with the friendly theists who frequent sites like this. However, in your efforts to play nice, quote-unquote, and quote-unquote be civil, you actually do them a great disservice. We are atheists. We believe that the universe is a great, uncaused, random accident. All life in the universe, past and future, are the results of random chance acting on itself. While we acknowledge concepts like morality, politeness, civility seem to exist, we know they do not. Our highly evolved brains imagine that these things have a cause or a use, and they have in the past. They've allowed life to continue on this planet for a short blip of time. But make no mistake, all our dreams, loves, opinions, and desires are figments of our primordial imagination. They are fleeting electrical signals that fire across our synapses for a moment in time. They served some purpose in the past. They got us here. That's it. All human achievement and plans for the future are the result of some ancient evolved brain and accompanying chemical reactions that once served a survival purpose. Example, I'll marry and nurture children because my genes demand reproduction. I'll create because creativity served a survival advantage to my ancient ape ancestors. I'll build cities and laws because this allowed my ape grandfather time and peace to reproduce and protect his genes. My only directive is to obey my genes. Eat, sleep, reproduce, die. That is our Bible. We deride the theists for having created myths and holy books. We imagine ourselves superior, but we too imagine there are reasons to obey laws, be polite, protect the weak, etc. Rubbish. We are nurturing a new religion, one where we imagine that such conventions have any basis in reality. Have they allowed life to exist? Absolutely. But who cares? Outside of my greedy little gene's need to reproduce, there's nothing in my world that stops me from killing you and reproducing with your wife. Only the fear that I might be incarcerated and thus be deprived of the opportunity to do the same with the next guy's wife stops me. Some of my atheist friends have fooled themselves into acting like the general population. They live in suburban homes, drive Toyota Camrys, and attend school plays, but underneath they know the truth. They are a bag of DNA whose only purpose is to make more of themselves. So be nice if you want. Be involved. Have polite conversations. Be a model citizen. Just be aware that while you technically are an atheist, you are an inferior one. You're just a little bit less evolved, that's all. When you're ready to join me, let me know. I'll be reproducing with your wife. I know it's not PC to speak so bluntly about the ramifications of our beliefs, but in our discussions with theists, we sometimes tiptoe around what we really know to be factual. Maybe it's time we atheists were a little more truthful and let the chips fall where they may. At least that's what my genes are telling me to say. I wanted to read that to you because I thought that was really, first of all, well written. And there's a certain amount of drama, obviously, in that as well. But I think it does give us some insight. And we talk about this all the time. Worldviews matter. Ideas have consequences. Not to say that we should lean on Christianity as true simply because it produces for us a better sense of well-being, or it makes us feel better. That's not a good reason to embrace any worldview. But it is true that our worldview does have a consequence in the way we live. It does seem to regulate certain behaviors, not really from fear, but just from wanting to live in the truth. And if the truth of atheism, without any sense of purpose, without really any, and I think here he recognizes pretty easily and pretty correctly that there is no way to ground moral behavior in this type of a purely naturalistic worldview. I don't care what Sam Harris tries to tell us in his books. There's a difference between what is practically useful and what you ought to do, what is morally compelling. These are not the same things. And I think that you could look at this and say to yourself, gosh, at least he gets it. He gets it and he's consistent with his worldview. This idea that we should behave a certain way is a borrowing from the Christian worldview. This idea that there are transcendent moral truths related to how we care for each other. He says, who cares? You folks, you atheists who imagine yourselves to be superior are just creating for yourself a new religion in which the high values of obeying the law and being polite and protecting the weak are an illusion. That's rubbish. He's basically saying, if what we believe is true about atheism, then you have no grounds on which to embrace those values as somehow being more important. The only things that are important are what keep your genes in the gene pool. And that might sometimes mean that you need to be brutal. I dare say there are millions of people alive today because their ancestors brutally made sure their genes were in the gene pool. They did the exact opposite of what a lot of our even atheist friends who would call us to be generous and call us to be concerned for the poor and concerned for those who were in need. There are millions of us on the planet today because our ancestors did just the opposite. So don't tell me that does not benefit the gene pool to sometimes behave poorly. It usually does. And here we are acting as though there's some benefit to this kind of behavior. At least this writer is being honest about where, number one, where the worldview leads, and number two, how ludicrous it is to pretend as though these things still matter if some form of theism isn't true. I think he hits it right on the head. Now, I'll be, I think, posting on this next week, so you'll be able to find it on the website as well, but I really think that this is one of the few, this is a helpful letter for us. And I think that this is one of the few atheists you're going to encounter who is at least living consistently with his worldview and stop trying to pretend and borrow from a theistic worldview to ground things. In the end, as long as he can get away with it, he's more concerned about reproducing with your wife. As he said here, it's not politically correct, but it is true that probably gives him the best chance. At least, some of those genes will go forward. Let's say my goal was to sleep with as many women as possible, because some of those are going to have kids, and most of those are going to survive. And even if I got caught and killed by some angry husband, I've already reproduced my gene pool frequently in the population. If you're really looking at it in terms of the benefit of your gene pool, there's all kinds of behavior you shouldn't do that you would be able to excuse yourself for doing. So I think this is should be an eye-opener. And if folks, if you ever wonder where your worldview will lead you, I just recently had a discussion. How many times have you been called out on some behavior that you have done as a Christian that was not appropriate, and the person who called you out said, hey, Jim, or whatever your name is, how can you be a consistent or call yourself a Christ follower if you do this X, whatever X is? And when that thing is said to me, I have to ask myself, yeah, you're right. I can't do that without being a hypocrite. I can't do those things anymore and call myself a Christ follower. And that is so compelling for me. When I think that way, it constantly reins in my behavior. I have to be consistent with my worldview. What if my worldview said, hey, everything goes, anything goes? Now, you might say, well, no, look, as an atheist, you're not going to do that. No atheist lives that way. No, I didn't either. As an atheist, I think I had a pretty moral life. But like this atheist says, I was fooling myself. I was embracing, unknowingly, values that are only grounded in a theistic worldview. And embracing those values as if I could make some sense of them as an atheist. Of course, I couldn't. It's not that atheists cannot behave well. We can. It's that we cannot ground our behavior. In the end, if you said, well, why are you behaving that way? When push comes to shove and you think about it deeply, you're going to have to say, well, I just choose to. In essence, I borrow from the culture around me, which is still distinctly grounded in theism. Anyway, something for you to think about, I hope, as you consider your discussions with your atheistic friends. I think I'll post this article in an article next week so you can kind of print it out yourself and take a look at it and bring it to those folks you're in dialogue with, because I really think it's a wonderful example of where this kind of thinking leads.